This plot of land once sat at the heart of the British establishment, but depending on who you listen to, it could soon become a grave threat to national security.
China wants to build a so-called super embassy close to the Tower of London.
The Chinese are buying up buildings all around here. What do they want them for?
MI5, MI6 and even the FBI are sounding the alarm over what many say could form the centre of one of the biggest espionage networks in Europe.
It is a perfect facility for hidden intelligence activities to happen.
It is likely to become a base for their pan-European espionage activities.
Or could it be what its owners say it is? The home of a budding yet fraught relationship between two nations with a lot of history. This is the proposed site of China's new embassy in the United Kingdom. If it gets built, it won't just be the biggest in London, but the biggest in Europe. But that's a big if, because this has just become the most controversial development in Britain.
China is not a friend, it's a threat to our freedoms and our security.
This is Britain, this isn't China. People have the right to expect freedom.
So why does China need such a big HQ? And why does everybody, from the local residents all the way up to Britain's spy chief, want to stop it from being built?
Embassies are strange places, and before you all kick off in the comments, yes, embassy refers to the diplomatic mission of a country. The building itself is technically called the Chancery, but we're going with the most commonly used phrase here. On a surface level, it's an office full of people doing the kind of boring things that we all do in offices. But beyond that, it's a statement, an image of a country projected through Portland stone and cream stucco. It may seek to evoke a sense of power or flamboyance. And when you have the rest of the world as your neighbours, what form your embassy takes can also show your position in the diplomatic pecking order, either at the top or somewhere near the bottom.
They're governed by a very unusual set of laws, chief among them being the golden rule of international diplomacy, that the building and its staff are completely off limits to anyone except the country it represents.
Over the years, that's become very useful for conducting more than just diplomatic business. But don't just take our word for it. Here's an actual former spy master to tell us more.
Philip Ingram, I'm a former senior British military intelligence officer. I was a colonel in British military intelligence. The role of an embassy is to represent the government of the country that that embassy represents to the government of the country that the embassy is based in. But also what you're there to do is to get an understanding of your host country so that you can go back and brief your government and what's going on. And that is gathering information. Whether that information is overt in the press or talking to people or anything else, you're gathering information. That's intelligence. It's all open source intelligence. But then it also acts as a cover for more secret intelligence.
But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This right here is China's current home in the UK. And in a sign of just how far back relations go between these two nations, this was actually China's first ever embassy anywhere in the world.
It was set up by the Qing dynasty in 1876 in the wake of the Margary Affair. Colonial explorer Augustus Margary was killed while establishing trade routes in western China. British officials used this as a pretext to force China to sign an unequal treaty, which demanded, among a lot of other things, that an envoy from the Qing dynasty be sent to personally apologise to Queen Victoria in London.
The home the legation stayed in became its permanent diplomatic mission, and it's remained that way ever since. As the number of staff grew, the original building was knocked down and rebuilt in 1985 as a concrete frame faced with brick. It was made bigger and those mansard roofs were added on top, but otherwise the facade stayed the same. It's a big building by anyone's standards, but not big enough.
Much of China's consular and visa work is spread across offices around London, which isn't exactly ideal. So in 2018, the People's Republic snapped up this, Royal Mint Court. There's no shortage of space here. The site contains several buildings spread across 5.5 acres of prime London real estate.
And it gets even better. This site sits in the bustling heart of London. You've got the Tower of London over there, and then just down that way, the river and Tower Bridge. As the name suggests, it used to be the home of the Royal Mint, where all of Britain's money was printed. As recently as 1970, every pound coin and penny in this country came through those gates, which is why it was situated here. If there were ever any problems, they could call in soldiers from the Tower of London to come and sort things out. The thing to take away from all this is that in a business where prestige is everything, it doesn't get better than this.
One thing we've learned working on projects like this, where politics, security and design all collide, is that bigger picture thinking usually comes from looking really closely at the details. You've got to be able to shift perspective, to break down problems and try and approach them from different angles. It's why I love this app called Brilliant. Now, it's not just a way of learning. For me, it's really a way of challenging my own thought patterns and staying mentally focused. Brilliant has thousands of lessons in maths, science, data analysis, programming, you name it. It's an interactive way of learning, which is great if you're someone like me who gets bored of textbooks pretty quickly. When you're deep in the research on geopolitics, it's easy to get stuck in the details. So I try and take regular breaks to give myself a sense of perspective. With courses like this new one on logic, it's really helped me to think through problems in a rigorous and methodical way. It's a genuinely brilliant way to stay mentally engaged, and is something I've built into my weekly routine. Viewers of the B1M get 20% off a premium annual subscription, which will give you unlimited daily access to everything Brilliant has to offer. Now, if you're not convinced just yet, don't worry, because you can get started for free by heading to the link down there in the video description. That link is brilliant.org/the B1M. Me and the team here at the B1M massively rate Brilliant, and by supporting Brilliant, you're helping us continue to make great videos for you guys, so please do take the time to go and check them out. We would really, really appreciate it. But for right now, we're focusing in on the Royal Mint. As prestigious as the location may be, the complex itself wasn't exactly move-in ready. Various tenants have passed through the Mint since it closed in 1980, but it sat empty for years before being bought by the Chinese government. To transform this fixer-upper into a world-class embassy, China hired David Chipperfield Architects, one of Britain's most celebrated studios. And this is what they came up with. The iconic Johnson Smirke building would remain the centrepiece of the complex, with the ground floor used for ceremonial engagements. The entire building would be refurbished and upgraded with a modern MEP system. The Siemens Register would be significantly remodelled to transform it into a single, coherent building. The Georgian entrance would be kept and restored, and the ground floor fitted out for diplomatic reception areas. Finally, the 1980s exterior on the west side would be replaced with a vertical brick facade to unify the building's aesthetic. The biggest challenge was presented by those two 1980s office blocks. The brief was to keep as much of the original buildings as possible, but here Chipperfield came up against a whole raft of issues. Now, if you're a fan of 1980s architecture, then this is the place for you. The problem is, this doesn't really cut much muster by today's building standards. You can see this building is covered in these huge glass panes, which are pretty terrible for insulation. In other words, it's freezing cold in the winter and boiling hot in the summer. You can also see this steelwork protruding from right across the facade. It really is the kind of the language and DNA of this building is to express its structure. The problem with that is, even though it was the height of fashion 40 years ago, everywhere that ties back into the building, everywhere it penetrates the building envelope to make a connection back to the superstructure, it creates something that's known as a thermal bridge, which is basically an engineer's way of saying a point at which hot and cold can get in and out of the building. To solve this, the two 1980s blocks were extensively redesigned. The building at the rear is to become accommodation for Embassy staff. The inefficient cladding and crazy 80s steelwork is out, and a restrained minimalist facade is in. But in keeping with the brief to reuse as much as possible, the overall structure, including the internal steel frame and the floor plates, were kept, albeit with a few tweaks. The original office building featured deep floor plates which are unsuitable for accommodation. To solve this, the line of the facade would be taken back into the building, reducing the interior size and providing each apartment with a balcony. Murray House, the other 80s block, would be redeveloped as another showpiece building, the Cultural Exchange. The lower ground floor would be used for visa services, with offices and space for cultural events above. Just like with Embassy House, much of the structure of the original building is being kept. But in a nod to the UK and China's shared history of ceramics, its finish is to be clad in celadon glazing. Its grey-green colour is traditionally used in Chinese pottery to represent the sky after rain, so pretty perfect for London. But before we get carried away with fancy facades and rain-coloured glass, embassies also have a very particular set of requirements regarding security.
You have to look at the threats, and the threats will fall roughly into two areas. a physical threat and an electronic threat. So from a physical threat, you'll start to keep any potential terror threats, vehicles, people and all the rest of it, keep that as far away from the embassy building as possible. So if something goes bang, it's not going to damage it or cause the embassy to collapse.
This is the US Embassy in London, completed in 2017. Despite its blocky appearance, it uses a lot of clever techniques to hide a very substantial security presence. To begin with, the whole building is raised up from ground level and placed on top of a large grassy mound. This gives the building an attractive park setting, but also provides a 100-metre blast zone in case anything, indeed, goes bang. On the north side, a row of hedges hides vehicle bollards, and for anyone who gets past that, there's a 2.5-metre deep lake waiting beyond. That trick is repeated on the south side by the way of a grass meadow which hides a huge trench. These star-shaped blinds keep the sun off the building's huge exterior, but they also obscure any device that might try and detect what's going on inside.
It's all pretty clever stuff, but the US Embassy had the advantage of being built on a brownfield site from scratch. Now, it probably won't surprise you to know that the full security details of the Chinese Embassy are not publicly available, but a set of recommendations made by the local council did give some insight as to the kind of tricks that this building is going to have up its sleeve.
Embassies attract protests. With the site being surrounded by busy roads, this park at the rear was identified as one of the few areas where large groups could gather. So £75,000 is going to be spent on landscaping and gym equipment and make it an impractical place to meet. As well as this, nearly £250,000 is being given to the local council to equip this part of London with new CCTV and monitor everyone in the area. Aside from that, most other features we know about are distinctly low-tech. The existing boundary wall is big enough to secure most of the perimeter, although it's going to be reinforced with blast protection in certain places. Vehicle bollards are being positioned along the more open areas of the site, and the railings at the front are being raised by 30 centimetres.
Back in 2018, when planning began, spirits were high. Ambassador Liu Xiaoming declared that this would be the golden fruit of a new China-UK golden era and the embodiment of China's dream for a harmonious world. In June 2021, the Chinese diplomatic mission formally submitted its plans to the local council, and almost immediately their hopes came crashing back down to earth.
Now let's be clear, the so-called golden era is over.
In the intervening years, relations between China and the UK had deteriorated, and as a result, the fruit also began to sour. Heritage groups objected to the symbolism of such a historic site being transformed into a foreign embassy, while local residents living next door said their concerns had been ignored. Even while we were filming this video, we were approached by neighbours who claimed that some homeowners had been unable to sell their flats because the freehold had been bought by the Chinese state. At a local council meeting, a motion was tabled to rename neighbouring streets in protest of China's human rights record. But the loudest objections came from the shadows. Concerns from the intelligence community circled on the threat of espionage. As it turns out, the prime location of the embassy would give it access to more than just prestige. Right here is the City of London, and over here is Canary Wharf. Together, they make up the second largest financial hub in the world. Sitting right in the middle of them is Royal Mint Court.
It's got a physical view of a lot of the buildings in the City of London. And where you've got view, you can have antenna that can intercept wireless signals that are going between them and wireless communications and download that. Every embassy's got the ability to suck information out of the atmosphere because it is recognised as Chinese national territory. So there's nothing we can do about it.
But what's above the embassy is not nearly as concerning as what's below it. This is the master plan of the embassy's basement. It shows the service cores, vehicle entrance and parking layouts. What it doesn't show is anything here. Now, with secure buildings like these, it's very normal to redact some information on publicly available documents. But this, along with the sheer size of the basement, caused panic among security analysts.
The basement's huge. And people can move from the accommodation blocks into the basement without being seen. Every embassy has got a secure facility within it that their national intelligence people will sit in. The conversations happen in there, so they can't be eavesdropped on. And you're seeing how much of that is greyed out and classified. It'd be interesting to see whether there's Faraday cage type capability built into the walls and all the rest of it to stop external probes being put down to try and listen as to what's going on.
Such worries aren't unprecedented. In 2020, the Irish government rejected a proposed extension to the Russian embassy in Dublin, which contained plans for a vast basement. The facility would have included 20 storage areas, 13 toilets, and 4 unmarked rooms. But there was another very specific reason officials had to be concerned about the threat this basement posed. Running through the area are communications cables linking London's 2 financial hubs. Although the exact location of these cables is a secret, the risk to them was enough to cause the former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, to speak out against the plan. In an interview with the I newspaper, he said, "If there are cables under the site, the Chinese with impunity can link into them and listen to everything or collect anything and everything going down those communication chains."
Tapping into that will give access to endless amounts of data. The Chinese hoover everything up. They're hoovering it up to put it in servers in continental China, knowing they can't process it and analyse it at the moment, but they will be able to once quantum computing comes in. And China's leading the world in development of quantum computing. And that's only a few short years away.
Shortly after the planning application was made, the head of Britain's domestic spy agency, MI5, and the director of the FBI gave a speech warning of Beijing's industrial levels of espionage. In a statement, the Chinese embassy condemned these remarks, calling them fabrications, and urged the UK to do more that is conducive to mutually beneficial cooperation between China and the UK.
But the damage was done. In December 2022, the local planning committee voted unanimously to reject permission for the new embassy. No appeal was launched against the verdicts, and that was that. The plan was dead in the water. And then this happened.
And we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
Our country has voted decisively for change.
On July the 5th, 2024, Labour came to office, and just a few days later, a planning application was made to Tower Hamlets for an embassy at Royal Mint Court using an identical set of documents.
But why would the local planning committee have a change of heart now? Well, the election actually dealt the Chinese government a pretty favourable hand. You see, to get anything built in the UK, you need to apply for something called planning permission. If you want to build a bungalow, a skyscraper, or even a bridge, you've got to have that permission. Normally you'll get that from your local council, which in this case is Tower Hamlets. 99% of the time, they make the final decision, they decide yes or no whether or not you can build something. But in very rare cases, a project can get called in by a government minister, the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. And in November 2024, that's exactly what happened here.
Up until this latest general election in the UK, the Tories were quite anti-relations with China. The new Labour government quite clearly are trying to look at where they can get trade benefit and with their policy being economic growth.
Post-election, a flurry of diplomatic activity between the two governments ensued, in an effort to enter yet another new era of relations.
The one thing that the Chancellor of the Exchequer wants to do is to try and exploit opportunities that there are with the second largest economy in the world. To try and get something back again, you have to give something.
That something is the embassy. But as the new government flashed Beijing an ankle, the backlash at home was huge.
It's an act of self-harm, and it's also a betrayal of British people to have it here.
Activists, the media and politicians of all affiliations mobilised to protest against any change of heart. With the final decision out of their hands, the Tower Hamlets Planning Committee rejected the resubmitted proposal in a symbolic vote. The opposition even spread beyond Britain's borders. In June this year, the White House warned the new embassy would pose a national security risk and could endanger intelligence sharing between the two countries.
And this is something that will be represented quite strongly by UK intelligence agencies into government and also by US intelligence agencies into UK government. Our politicians are making a balanced decision as to whether they think that the risk is something that is going to cause them political risk as opposed to the benefits that they can achieve politically by allowing this sort of thing to happen.
We just don't know right now if this is going to get built. A decision is expected later this year. It's worth pointing out that the UK is also trying to build its own new embassy right now over in Beijing, but that looks almost impossible if this doesn't get the go-ahead. I guess whatever the outcome, this whole saga really does highlight a dramatic reversal in fortunes for the UK and China. China's no longer the humiliated party arriving on bended knee, and the UK is being forced to weigh up whether it wants to trade some of its security for its economy. Behind closed doors, the story of this embassy is anything but diplomatic. This video was sponsored by Brilliant. Don't forget to take the time to go and check them out at the link below. And as always guys, if you enjoyed this video and you want to get more from the definitive video channel for construction, make sure you're subscribed to the B1M.